Again, if you've got something like that in your life, confront it head on. If you are doing something for validation, perfection is a worthwhile goal, but you can't let it affect What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Cabin Checks. My name is Brandon Burns, and today we're going to do something that we have never done before. We're going to do a Q&A episode with questions that were generated by you all, from the people who watch this channel, who follow me on Instagram at IMBBurns or other social media. Sometimes I post question stickers over there. Sometimes I just get DMs. Sometimes it's a comment that's left on one of these videos. And I compile that stuff, and one of my favorite things to do as a speaker is Q&As. Like, I enjoy Q&A sessions more than anything else, and I think it's because it makes me feel like I am more able to help the person who's on the other end of that question, right? Like, if I'm up there giving a keynote or just speaking, it's great, but at the end of the day, it's my ideas of what I think will move the needle for somebody in the audience. When it's Q&A, like, you're telling me what's going to move the needle, so it's very, very easy for me to say, oh, here, this is what you're asking for, so here's what I think would help the most. So I enjoy Q&A a ton. I've gathered a bunch of questions right here, just 10 for today. We're probably going to do these somewhat regularly, maybe once a month. We'll have a Q&A episode or maybe a bonus Cabin Check episode that's just dedicated to Q&A. This one, I also grabbed a few questions from people who, surprise, I'm writing my first book. No big book deal or anything like that yet. I'm getting the manuscript finished, and then once that's done, I'm going to start approaching some different publishers, and thankfully I have some connections in that world, so I'm hopeful, fingers crossed, that we can make something pretty big happen with that. But I'm working my way through it right now, and I just kind of handed off the portion of the manuscript that's finished so far. It's like 30 pages, and I just handed that off to a couple of friends and family members and everything, and I was like, hey, based off of this, are there any questions that come up for you all? So I got a few of those in there as well. So without further ado, 10 questions from start to finish. This is not scripted. This is no sort of predetermined direction. We're just going to see where this goes together. So question number 1, can you tell us more about your relationship with your father and how his work ethic influenced you? Absolutely. And the relationship that I have with my father, and I know this person right here is referring to technically my stepfather, and I've told this story a bunch on this channel, but my stepfather, let me back up. My biological father left before I was ever born. I knew who he was. My mother was very transparent about, like, hey, here's the situation. We don't hate each other. It's not like that, but he felt like this was going to be, a better situation all around. So he left before you were ever born. I mean, I remember being 5 years old and having a basic understanding of that. Like, obviously I didn't know all the nuances, but I had a basic understanding of, okay, he was the one who physically helped create me, but he's not like in the house on a day-to-day basis. I'll see him a couple times a year, right? My stepfather also came into the equation also before I was born, right? So he was with me since day one. And it was kind of weird growing up because I would call Blaine, who is whenever I refer to my father, I'm referring to Blaine, who is technically my stepfather. But since he was there for me since day one, to me, that's my dad, flat out, right? But when I was growing up, I would call him Papa because I didn't want to call him dad or father yet because I was kind of weirded out by that whole situation. And then Billy, who is my biological father, I didn't want to call him dad because in my mind, I was like, I don't want to give him all the credit considering this other guy's here raising me. So I called him Daddy Billy. So it was Papa and Daddy Billy, right? And, how did that relationship with my father and his work ethic influence me? As I got older, 2 separate things happened. One, I realized the hole that Daddy Billy leaving early left in me. I grew up from the age of literally from the day that I was told, like, hey, here's the situation, and I could kind of start to comprehend it through until the time I was probably 19 or 20. I had this mentality that it doesn't bother me at all. Like, I don't care. I'm completely indifferent about it. I'm blessed with the situation that I have with my dad, Blaine, and it just doesn't affect me. As I started to mature, kind of in my early 20s, I started being more self-aware. and I became more conscious. And I was like, wow, I'm doing a lot of things to get attention. And I was always an introvert. Like, I never wanted to be the famous one. I never necessarily wanted to be the person with a ton of friends, hanging out with all sorts of people around me all the time. I never wanted that, but I realized, oh, I'm really going hard at this social media thing, and I'm playing up these viral videos that I'm having. I'm doing like crazy stuff to get attention from females, and it's like, I started to realize, oh, I'm doing this because somewhere deep down, I feel like the person who should have given me affirmation, attention, and affection didn't, right? And so that kind of developed in my early 20s, and I had a conversation with my biological father just before my 25th birthday. We sat down, we talked about it. I was like, hey, I just want to know from you, like, why did this happen? Like, I want to hear your side of the story. And I actually came out of that conversation with a lot of healing, and a lot more respect for just him as a person, right, than I think I had before that. Because realistically, I was harboring some resentment, even though I didn't know it. So just to make this, at least put a little bit of a bow on this and give it as a takeaway for you all, I don't care what kind of relationship it is with you and anybody else in your life, if there's that feeling deep down where you're like, man, I don't know if this is right. Like, I don't feel 100% right. And again, you can tell yourself all day long, it don't bother me. It don't bother me. Hey, and that was me for so many years. I promise you it doesn't bother me. I don't care one way or the other. Blah, 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 blah. This tough guy attitude. And then when I got down to it, I was like, wow, you're making some crazy decisions based off of the way that you feel, and you haven't dealt with that yet. And that's left this hole that distractions can get into and fill, right? Distractions can't fill a hole that's not there. So again, if you've got something like that in your life, confront it head on. Doesn't mean that you have to be rude about it. Just go have the conversation. I promise you, however difficult you think that conversation is going to be, it will not be nearly as difficult as harboring whatever that pain is for the rest of your life. All right. So that's the first thing that happened. But to get more direct to the question here, and I promise you there's a reason I'm dragging this out. The reason that my relationship with my technically stepdad, but with my dad, the reason that relationship has carried so much weight in my life is because I'm genuinely in awe of the man that he is. Like, for real, this is a guy who had no responsibility or obligation to take me on, to love me the way that he did, to assume responsibility for raising me as his own the way that he did, to care about me, to sacrifice. This man never missed days of work unless he was freaking, on death's door. Like, he sacrificed so much for me and my mom. And to think about the fact that, like, he didn't have to. Like, he did not put himself in that situation. Like, he literally made a choice. He made a choice. This wasn't a physical thing where it's like, oh, okay, this is my kid. Now I have to deal with this for the next 18 years. He literally decided that it was just going to be worth it to him before he ever even knew me. So think about the polarity here. There's one, and again, I promise I do not harbor any resentment towards my biological father. We have a much better relationship now. But it is what it is. I got one person who I should have been his responsibility, and he said, not going to do it. I had somebody else who had no responsibility or obligation over me, and he said, I'm going to sacrifice the next 20 years of my life to pouring into this child and raising him to be the best man that he can be. That is crazy. That is, I don't want to cuss, but that is freaking crazy to me, right? The amount of ownership and investment that this man made before he knew me is that's why it's like, it's this crazy, and I don't want to go too deep, but if you've ever read Ion by Carl Jung, it's this crazy psychological, it's like a psychological thriller. I mean, it really is. It's just an insane book. It's terrifying. But it basically presents this worldview of opposites, right? You can't have up without down. You can't have left without right. You can't have joy without suffering, so on and so forth. And that's my story. Like, as before I was born, somebody who should have been there said no. Somebody who shouldn't have been there said yes. It's these two opposing forces. And I look at him, my dad, and I look at everything that he did for me, and it's just this model for me to run after. Like, seeing the way that he worked for me, the sacrifices that he made, the investments that he made, it just gives me this North Star to go after. So a couple of things there, right? If you're going to be present in anybody's life, this is not just a father-son thing. If you're going to play a role in anybody's life, you need to think about, are you being a model that you would want that person to look up to and follow? Because my dad is my superhero, straight up. And he's the character of a man that I attempt to emulate every day. And I fall short all the time. But that's what I'm striving for. Like, he is my highest blueprint that I can imagine. It's like Christ, my dad, right? You are that to somebody, whether you want to be or not. I always talk about in my leadership videos, leadership is not a choice. You have a circle of influence. You have people watching you. You have people observing you. And the way that you handle yourself is going to rub off on people. And you got to ask yourself, do you want to be a part of the problem? Or do you want to be a part of the solution? Because at the end of the day, that's all it is. It's like there are forces for good. There are forces for not good. I won't necessarily go as far as to call it evil, but which way do you want to tip the scales in the grand scheme of things? Because the butterfly effect is real. Somebody watches you. I'm literally going to, and I say this with all due humility, I am going to change the world based off of who my dad was, based off of the example that he set. All the stuff I say on stage for thousands of people, it's just observations of who he is. That's all I'm talking about. Is, hey, I put it in my own stories, and I deliver it in my own way, and so on and so forth to make it entertaining. But like, that's all I'm talking about is the model of a man who raised me. So if you don't think that that's real and that you're not in that, you have no idea how much influence that you could have, not just over you or your family, but over the world. 1, 2, 3, 4 degrees of separation away, you could change the entire world and not even know it. I digress. I gotta hurry up, otherwise we're never gonna get through these questions. But that's a little bit about the relationship that I have with my father and how his work ethic influenced me. You know, one more thing before we leave this question. I was a super anxious kid growing up. Super anxious kid growing up. And he would always say, this too shall pass. And don't sweat the small stuff. Everything's small stuff. Those two little phrases, and they're such like dad phrases, like, oh, it seems relatively small and insignificant, you know, whatever. Those two little phrases have changed my life. They've completely changed my life. So that's a little bit about how he influenced me. Okay, let's move on. Home environment. Your description of your home in Alabama paints a vivid picture. How did growing up in a modest home shape your perspective on life and success? I'll be honest, I learned how to be happy with very, very little. I learned that, you know, having dinner with your family is more about the laughs that you have and the conversation that you have, more so than what you're eating. We would have 99-cent banquet TV dinners with the chicken nuggets that weren't even real meat. You know what I'm saying? And we would have the best freaking time, you know? So it really taught me that there are deeper things than material success. That's just not what's important, right? And that's kind of a theme that I think has radiated to other areas of my life when I think about it. I mean, some of the most fun that I've had on the job, like the most fun that I've had while working, was one thing that comes up in my mind right now is I was at a gymnastics camp. You probably heard me talk about that on this channel in the past. I was at a gymnastics camp, since the time I was 10 years old. And I was in charge of junior counselors, right? And these were kids, 15, 16 years old, who were working at camp to help offset their tuition at camp. They couldn't quite afford it, so very similar to my story. And I was in charge of them, and all of our vacuum cleaners broke one day. All of our vacuums broke, and we had to clean the gym. It was a Thursday night, and on Thursday nights, that's what we did, is we cleaned the gym. Keep in mind, this is not like your average little gym. This is an industrial-sized, it's a summer camp. I mean, it's freaking huge. And we had no vacuum cleaners. I said, guys, here's what we're going to do. We're all going to line up like a freaking start of a race. We're going to get on our hands and knees, and we're going to crawl across the floor together, and we're going to become a human vacuum, and we're going to pick up the big pieces of stuff that we can see with our eyes. And that's what we're getting. We're going to go from one end of the floor to the other, turn around, move over, one end of the floor to the other, turn around, move over, one end of the floor to the other, and we're going to do this together until we have this whole place cleaned. And the jokes that were cracked, the conversations that were had, took us like an hour. It was some of the most fun I have ever had in my entire life. And it was doing a terrible, stupid job, right? But situations like that, whether it's growing up without having a whole lot or being in a work environment or a job that most people would say, well, that sucks. You know, it teaches you to enjoy what you do have. And oftentimes, as we continue to strive for more and more and more out of life, I think we lose that ability to be in the present moment. We lose that happiness with what we have and that ability to just make the best of whatever's going on in the current present situation. So I think that's how it affected me. Okay, gymnastics. What drew you to gymnastics at such a young age, and how did you manage to excel in it? I'll be honest, I have no idea what attracted me to gymnastics. I do not remember ever seeing it on TV. I don't remember ever watching the Olympics. Nobody in my family ever did gymnastics. I literally woke up one day and said, Mom, I want to go to a gymnastics class. And to me, that's what a calling looks like. It is just this thing that's within you, and you know what it is, and hopefully that you listen to it. And I think as we get older, we stop listening to those inner voices, those callings, those things that maybe don't make any logical sense, but that simply speak to us, And I pestered my parents about this for months until finally they said, fine, let's go enroll you in a starter class, a free trial class. And it was love at first sight, and it took off from there. So it was truly a calling. I don't have a rational explanation for it. And if you have anything like that in your life where you just feel pulled towards it, chase it and never look back, because I promise you that's God's little whisper to you to say, hey, here's where I need you to go. How did I excel in it? I have this theory on work ethic, that work ethic is not one thing, it's two sub-variables, and work ethic is the aggregate of those two variables, and that's just what we call it in day-to-day conversation. I think that work ethic splits off into two different things. Number one is discipline, number two is passion. I believe that because if you're passionate about something, you're going to work hard whether you're disciplined or not, and if you're disciplined, then even on the days where you don't feel super passionate about it, or you start to lose that intrinsic motivation, that discipline will continue to make you work hard regardless. So between those two things, if you got both of them, your work ethic is never going to lack or suffer. So I feel like I had both of those, just as a point of like character, going back to what my dad showed me, right? Even like the fact that he never missed work. He always had this philosophy of, if I'm going to feel bad, I could feel bad and sit here at home and do nothing, or I could feel bad and be productive. Why not feel bad and be productive if I'm going to feel bad either way? I took that mentality with gymnastics. And I just said, you know what? I'm going to be disciplined at this. I'm going to commit myself to this. But then the passion made that so much easier. I literally loved every single second of training gymnastics. That's why I still do it as often as I can today. No purpose, no reason to do it. It's positively counterproductive to my health at this point. But you know what? I freaking love it. And it's just something that I always want to be able to do to the best of my ability as I age and get older. I want to stay in the gym as much as I humanly can. So between passion and work ethic, I think it made it relatively easy to excel. And honestly, like, if you can find something in your life, like that's what a purpose and a calling looks like. You get that little wink from the universe, that whisper from God. And then if you have that discipline and that passion towards something, it would be this is something Alex Ramosi talks about a lot. It would be unreasonable to expect you to not get pretty good at it. It wouldn't even make sense. If you have both of those variables working in your favor, it wouldn't make sense to not get good at it. So I'm not the most talented athlete in the world. I just loved what I did, and I was relatively disciplined at it. Okay, you mentioned in the book a strong inner calling to gymnastics. How important do you think that intrinsic motivation is in achieving success? Intrinsic motivation is incredibly important, because at the end of the day, if you are doing something for external validation, or if you're doing something to get a prize, you've got a carrot to chase. When that carrot begins to look less appealing, which always happens, by the way, like eventually, let's say that you're striving for that promotion, right? And then eventually, as you work towards it, the curtains kind of get pulled a little bit, and you get to peek behind the curtain, and you say, well, man, the day-to-day life of somebody who has that promotion is not really as glamorous as I thought it would be. And then you start to really break down the numbers. You say, well, would that raise really change my life that much? The carrot is never as glamorous and as good as you really think that it's going to be. But of course, society paints a picture of a great carrot. It's like, hey, you see these people on private jets and Lamborghinis and blah, 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 and they're traveling, and it's like, oh, it looks like the best life ever. You don't know how those people really live. You don't know how they feel inside. Like, you don't know whether they're struggling with something in their heart and their mind. Like, you just don't know. But it's almost never what you think it is, and everything that glitters is not gold, right? So I would just say that intrinsic motivation is what's going to help you stay on the path when inevitably that carrot that you're chasing starts to lose a little bit of the flash that attracted you to it in the first place. The intrinsic motivation is what keeps you going, and it's what keeps you motivated long term. You know, I mean, a lot of people, they start something, they don't finish it. That's why I've never been concerned about my speaking career. I've never been concerned about my personal brand and my ability to grow it, because I have gotten to peek behind the curtain of this industry by working with Eric Thomas for a while now, being his agent. And I've seen the best of the best on stage. And I've seen these people who make millions of dollars and have millions of followers. Most of them are trash. And I'm not saying that to throw shade at anybody in the industry. I'm just saying most of them are not that good. And because there's a difference, let me say it this way. There's a difference between a prophet and somebody who's seeking a prophet. Meaning there's a difference between somebody who feels called to this kind of work and feels like they're a conduit of something greater than somebody who's chasing a check and who's just trying to blow their brand up and get on these stages so that, like, they're not thinking about the audience, they're thinking about themselves. 90% of the people in the industry are thinking about themselves. It's a business play. It is what it is. It's like that in any industry. I'm not worried about it because in the long run, those people will be exposed. The light will always shine on those people, or they'll just simply lose motivation, right? Because again, they've got what they're after and then they're just going to fall off because they got their bag, they got their money. That's all they cared about in the first place. I'm going to be able to keep going because that motivation for me is intrinsic. So I'm not going to stop. I don't have a reason to stop. You take everything from me, I'm still going to be doing this because it's what I love to do. It's what I feel called to do. So that intrinsic motivation is what's going to keep you going when everybody else stops. Okay, I think that was 4. Let's do one more, because this is already at 21 minutes. Let's do one more, and then we'll split this up into 2 parts. These questions are taking a little longer than I thought. Okay. What are the most important life lessons that gymnastics has taught you? That's a really good one. Like I said, this is not scripted. So, honestly, I think one of the most important things that gymnastics has taught me, there's so many things that come to mind, because that sport, I think more than anything else, will introduce you to who you really are, because it's you versus you every single day. You got to go through fear every single day. You got to go through physical punishment every single day. I mean, it's a rough sport, but it shows you who you really are, and it really helps develop you internally. So one of the many things that comes to mind is it taught me that perfection is a worthwhile goal, but you should chase it, right? And I talk about this a lot. I hate this motivational speaker thing of like, oh, you should never chase perfection because you're never going to get it. It's like, why would you set your standard below what it could possibly be? I don't understand that for the life of me. And maybe this is just my gymnastics background talking. I don't understand why you could envision an outcome at the highest level. Like, you have a vision that is as good as it can possibly get, and you're going to aim just under that. Why would you do that? Why would you aim lower than what you can see? That's insane to me. But that's what we've been taught, right? And so gymnastics taught me, hey, aim for perfection. But when you don't quite get there, don't let it affect your self-esteem or your identity. Because you're not God, and you're not going to be perfect. But why not? I think that you will get closer to perfect by aiming for perfect than you would by aiming just under perfect. That's my opinion, right? When you look at anybody, I don't care if you want to use Kobe, Mamba mentality, you want to use MJ, whoever you want to use, who has been truly great, they hate the fact that they can't get to perfection. That is their standard. That is their goal. They don't say, okay, well, let me have a realistic expectation for myself. Nobody's ever been great with a set of realistic expectations. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. It's the stupidest thing you could possibly do. Say, yeah, you want to set yourself up for failure? Go get yourself some reasonable expectations. Go get yourself some reasonable expectations if you want to have a failure of a career or of a life. It bothers me because, like, people are talking other people into this mentality. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. I digress. That's one of the things that gymnastics taught me. Perfection is a worthwhile goal, but you can't let it affect your self-concept and your self-identity when you don't quite get there, right? And you can do both of those things simultaneously. Like, you can strive for perfection, and like that can be your North Star, but also be completely at peace when you don't quite hit it. And then you just constantly iterate and you say, okay, great. How do I get closer? How do I get closer? How do I get closer? And you find joy in the process of grinding that out and getting closer. gymnastics is a sport where you're almost never going to see a perfect 10, right? Now in women's collegiate gymnastics, I'm going to be a gymnastics nerd for a second here. In women's collegiate gymnastics, you will, because they're still on the old system. In men's gymnastics, we're scored in a more open-ended system. You're never going to see a perfect score. I assure you, you will never see a perfect score. Even if sometimes you probably should, the judges are never going to give it up, all right? We love, I'm going to speak for all gymnasts here, we love driving to see how close we can get to a perfect score. That's the fun. That's the chase. Is to say, how close can we get? How good can we get? That's what lights us on fire. To rob yourself of that, I think, is a crime against humanity. And with that, we're going to leave part 1 right here. And this list is taking a lot longer than I thought. So be sure to watch next week as we come back with another Q&A episode of Cabin Checks. Love y'all. Appreciate you for watching. If you found value in this video, please share it with somebody else. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, help the channel grow. I'm super passionate about building this thing, and by you doing exactly what I just said, like, comment, share, subscribe, that's how we get these messages into the hearts and minds of more people. So I'd really appreciate it if you do that for me. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, or if you have more questions for the next video, drop them in the comments below. My name is Brandon Burns. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode of Cabin Checks. Peace.